if staying on the borderline between science, faith, and superstition, there should be some talk about illicit knowledge or about prohibited knowledge. It's completely natural. And the other reason I was dealing in the last month with some curious accounts in Gesta Romanorum in this beautiful collection of medieval tales. And I was thinking this is a good illustration of the relationship between religion, science, and superstitions on the other side. Now, I'm starting with a couple of words to explain my choice and the exact meaning of descent motif, medieval exemplum, and modern science fiction. So what I want to say with these concepts. First of all, descent. Of course, this is a huge concept. The underworld has its logical place in every three-layer world, which is, of course, the predominant descriptive model for the universe in most ancient Indo-European cultures. The concept of subterranean land or city or pillars or just forest and river below or inside the earth is recorded both in the oral and the written tradition and is a premise for the appearance of narratives about ritual descent into the underworld. And if there is another world beneath, there should be entrances to it. Of course, we know the examples, Teneron in Laconia, not far away from Sparta, or Heraclea Pontica on Black Sea, the mounts of Etna on Sicily, where Proserpina or Persephone was carried off by Pluto, or Station Island in Ireland. There should be passing procedures, figures who make face control for this journey into a beyond, and so on. The topography of the realm of dead in the ancient Greek myth is already complex enough, but the medieval and pre-modern ideas about the underworld go through a further evolution, through a further transformation, and correspondingly the notion of descent into the underworld develops through the centuries. Now, I'm keeping here to the usual classification of the comparative religious studies of the types of descent. There is descent as shamanic ritual. I'm leaving this aside for obvious reasons. And then we have two different types of heroic descent. The heroic descent, the case of Orpheus, acquiring knowledge that can defeat death, or knowledge of the correct way to descend. Here we have, of course, the very important testimony of the Derveni papyrus, which contains a commentary, part of a commentary to the Orphic cosmogony. We have these Orphic golden lamelle sheets, which had the function, obviously, of something like passports to the underworld. So this is the only case where we have a little bit of the ritual contexts where the myth, the narrative appeared. As you know, normally we don't have this original context of the Greek myths in its primary function. Then we have heroic and initiation descent. This is the classical katabasis as we know it. So, for example, the exploits, the underworld journey of Heracles or Odysseus, the pursuit of immortality, the search of some special object, which is the case of Psyche, who went in a journey to the underworld. And then I must add here the Christian tradition, of course, with the Descensus Christi ad Inferus, which is actually the exact translation of Kateute esta katotata. The visionary descent, this is the last type of descent, and we're going to speak a little bit more about it. The visionary descent has, of course, propedeutic or moral purposes. So this is descent to the realm of death, which could contain description of the judgment of souls and of all torments awaiting sinners in the other worlds. Here we can, of course, put the Plato mythos of air in the 10th book of of the state. Here we can attribute the story of the harrowing of hell. Here we can attribute some of the medieval stories about which I'm going to speak later as Scala Caeli. Now, what I'm going to understand under medieval exemplum in this presentation, something completely specific. I mean these very popular, very influential medieval collections with exempla, which were an indispensable tool for every churchman who used in his preaching a variety of edifying, illustrating stories drawn from every possible sources, ancient sources in epitome, of course, medieval chronicles, book of commonplaces, even rhetoric books, which is the case with the Seneca the Father, even poems. To this group belong hundreds of collections of exempla, which are everywhere in the European libraries. The most influential being maybe Disciplina Clericalis of Petrus Alfonsi, Scala Caeli of Johannes Gobi Jr., Promptuarium Exemplorum Discipuli of Johann Herold, and some others. So this will, I understand, under medieval exemplum. And on the last place, modern science fiction, I put it really broadly in the title of the presentation. Actually, I mean the total of books, fiction plus non-fiction as well, games, films, animation, and whatsoever in modern times, which is indicative that the interest in the journey into underworld, into the descent, so to say, has not subsided. And just a couple of last words here in the introduction. If you think about it nowadays, we have the scholarly discourse about the geological past of our planet, the interior of our planet, and so on. They appeared new things and new findings every year. On the other side, so we have this, how to name it, quasi or pseudo scientific discourse about the future of humanity, which points toward the underworld. Yeah, we are going in the next century, or maybe in the end of this century, under the surface of the earth, and so on. A lot of superstition, of course, which sticks to this idea. And we have a huge bulk of every possible ideas about hidden dangers, some animated or not animated objects and things which just wait for us below the surface of the earth. So we are not so far away from our predecessors, as I want to show you. Now, I'm starting with two texts. Yes, they were speaking about this bad habit of the philologists, always to focus on some piece of text. I can't help it because I must show you the accounts, at least and in resume. Now, what I'm showing you is this is a small story, or not so small story, which is included in Gesta Romanorum. Gesta Romanorum, or the Deeds of Romans, this is absolute bestseller in the 14th and in the 15th century in Europe. Collection with exempla for the churchmen. They used this widely in their sermons. They really drew on these collections to use different stories to illustrate their sermons. And this is the case with this story as well. The edition is of Hermann Oesterley of Gesta Romanorum. This is old edition, but it's still in use. The title of the story is De Memoria Mortis and Non Delectando in Temporalibus, but actually this is usually cited as Percute hic, or Strike Here. And I'm going to use the same title further on. The collection in its earliest form can be traced back to the end of the 13th or maybe the beginning of the 14th century. We don't know who the compiler or the compilers are because there are at least two different traditions, one English tradition, one German tradition. There are only Latin texts and some German texts as well in different variants with different provenance. Tieck, or Strike Here, tells the story about a cleric who found the entrance code for a magnificent palace beneath the earth of Campus Martius, of course. So Campus Martius and is the the battlefield of many such stories, which is actually not very astonishing because Rome and the mirabilia of the city, they were the natural objects of many such stories. So because of his avarice, the cleric was trapped forever in the darkness of the underworld. And we have the story, and there follows allegorical explanation plus moral teaching. Now, I'm just showing shortly the text. I'm not going to go through the whole text. What I'm going to show is the English translation. It's old translation by Charles Swan, then expanded and revised by Thomas Wright. It's not very good English translation, but it would be better than my own translation in all cases, so I'm going to use it. There was an image in the city of Rome, standing in an erect posture with the dexter hand outstretched. And upon the middle finger was written "Strike Here." So for convenience, I have put in color all important catchphrases or keywords. The image stood a long time in this manner, and no one understood what the inscription signified. At last, a certain subtle clerk, hearing of the image, felt anxious to see it, and then he observed the superscription "Strike Here." He noticed that when the sun shone upon the image, the outstretched finger was discernible in the lantern shadow. And then he dug on this place to the depth of about 3 feet. This brought him to a number of steps. We have this staircase to hell now in the story, and this led him to a subterranean cavity. What happens after that? Descending the steps, he entered the hall of a magnificent palace. He saw many persons seated at table, and they all habited very well and kept most rigid silence. Then he beheld in one corner of the place a polished stone called a carbuncle. So this is something like granite, we call it, yeah? And by the single aid of which the hall was lighted. This was the source of light in the hall. In the opposite corner stood a man armed with a bow and arrow in the act of taking aim at the precious stone. Upon his brow of the statue, of the image, was inscribed, "I am what I am. My shaft is inevitable, nor can your luminous carbuncle escape its stroke." The clerk, amazed with what he saw, entered the bedchamber, found a multitude of beautiful women in purple garments, but not a sound escaped them. Then he proceeded to the stables, observed a number of horses, asses, silence again here. He touched everything he could, but they were nothing but stone. "I have seen wonders today," said he to himself, "but nobody will credit my account unless I carry back with me some incontrovertible testimony." This is important, that's why I put emphasis here. Now, he beheld a quantity of golden cups, so to have some testimony, yeah? And when he approached and laid his hands upon each, what happened? The archer, so this figure, struck the carbuncle with the arrow and shivered it into 1,000 atoms. Instantly, the whole building was enveloped in thick darkness, and the clerk, in utter consternation, sought his way back. But being unable to discover it, he perished in greatest misery amidst the mysterious stages of the palace. And follows the applications, because of course this is sermon and there must be some moral teaching in the end. My beloved, the image is the devil. The clerk is any covetous man who sacrifices himself to the cupidity of his desires. The steps by which he descends are the passions, and the archer is death, the carbuncle is human life, and the cup and knife are worldly possessions. So now you have here a survey of what we have here. The same story is recorded in Vincent de Beauvais, Speculum Historiale, in Pierre Bersuire, of course, in Reductorium Morale, and in many other similar collections of stories. This is not a typical descent here. We don't have many, but a lot of common things with the ancient types of descent. We have here magical statues. We have a very clever, curious cleric. We have a chain of riddles or instructions who lead the person in his way, and two inscriptions, per could strike here, and the other, I am what I am, obviously a hidden, or actually not hidden, completely explicit reference for the medieval people to the Exodus 3:14, I am who I am. Then we have digging a hole, hidden stairs, descent, and then again, things which are not familiar from the ancient traditions as enchanted place, these statues, and this is important, these are not dangerous creatures, this is inorganic world. It's self-contained, absolutely silent world in itself. We have, of course, a precious stone, source of light. This is so idea which we know from the Eastern tradition, but from the Christian tradition, of course. And maybe not so familiar to you, the death, the archer with a bow and arrow. So all these profanized things with the death, the image of the death with a scythe or a reaping hook and whatsoever, this is later things. And originally the iconography of the death was archer with a bow and arrow. Then we have the need to bring back some testimony which can persuade in the reality of these supernatural things, the people. And then finally, of course, we have punishment. For what? For the avarice or for the curiosity as well. These are the main points in this story. And I should say that this was very well known. And for example, in the 19th century, William Morris, in his poem *The Earthly Paradise*, used this example as well, pairing it in couple with the novel of Amor and Psyche altogether. And he obviously thought that these statues are fiends of hell. Yeah? At the upper end could see sitting a glorious company, therefore he trembled, thinking, well, they were no men, but fiends of hell. Some other adaptation of the story we have in the European Romanticism, in the children literature, actually, in many familiar stories as the Elfen, the elves of Ludwig Tieck, or in The Little Black Hen of Antoni Pogorelsky, who knew personally Hoffman, and so on. This is on itself, yeah, I know this is literature, it's maybe not so interesting for you, a story of literary motifs, but it's really astonishing how on the place of the cleric we have now the image of the obedient or innocent child who is the hero of these stories. The same plot, the same story, and the same moral teaching in the end, but in completely different context and function. And without happy end. This is important. It doesn't matter that they're small children literature. Now, this story is actually in Gesta Romanorum. This is a corruption, say the most scholars, a corruption of earlier story. And this takes us back to William of Malmesbury, to the end of the 11th and the beginning of the 12th century. Here you can see a picture. Here he keeps Gesta Pontificum. This is another important treatise of him, but I'm going to speak about the Gestis Regum Anglorum. This is a very important chronic of the English kings, which is maybe the second important work after Beda Venerabilis in the medieval English tradition. Now, William wrote a lot about miracles. We have demons, and we have miracles, and we have the whole bulk of this in his Chronicle of the English Kings. But one story or cycle of stories is outstanding, really. These are the stories about, which he tells about Gerbert of Aurillac. This is the future Pope Sylvester II. Although William he was confused, and so he is asserting that this is Innocentius, another pope. What about Gerbert? You can see a picture of him again. He was elected Pope in, this 999, very symbolic number. He had important role for the transmission of Arabic learning in the end of the 10th century. He spent 3 years in Barcelona, possibly in Sevilla and Cordoba, where he benefited a lot from the contemporary Islamic knowledge, mathematics, and astronomy. And later he took charge of the cathedral school in Reims, was abbot in the monastery of Saint Columban at Bobbio, archbishop of Ravenna, and so on. So he fabricated many astronomical tools and introduced the use of abacus, even composed a treatise about the use of abacus in the teaching. He reorganized, or at least tried to reorganize, the teaching of logic. So he got the reputation of a churchman addicted to the dangerous knowledge of the East, astral magic, practice of divination, commerce with demons, and so on. So after his death, he was credited all these suspicious relationships. And this is a typical pre-Faustian figure, exactly as the different historical or legendary figures which we associate with Dr. Faustus, or another figure like John Dee. So this is the same story. We have here a person who is being believed to practice the black arts. Now, what's telling William of Malmesbury about this person? The same story. So this is the earliest version of it. There was a stage where, in the Campus Martius near Rome. So I'm skipping just the not so important things. Again, the inscriptions try here. The men of former times, of course, they couldn't understand what is this. And they battered the harmless statue by repeated strokes of a hatchet. But Gerbert convicted them of error by solving the problem in a very different manner. Marking where the shadow of the finger fell at noonday, when the sun was on the meridian, he placed there a post. Then he came again at night, attended by a servant with a lantern. Then the earth opening by means of his accustomed art displayed to them a spacious entrance under the earth. Vast palace with golden walls, golden roofs, everything of gold, golden soldiers, and so on, golden dice, king of the same metal. Now we don't have the stone population, which we know from the later version. We have golden people. This is completely foreign to the ancient and to the early medieval versions of this story. So it already points somewhere to East. Delicacies, vessels of great weight. So the sculptures surpassed nature herself. And of course, we have again this carbuncle of first quality, which dispelled the darkness of night. And in the opposite corner, pay attention, this is not already Arcarius or adult man, but a boy holding a bow bent, and the arrow drawn to the head. There was nothing which might be handled, though it might be seen. We have taboo on touching. Then, if anyone stretched forth his hand to touch anything, all these figures appeared to rush forward. Alarmed at this, Gerbert repressed his inclination, but his stupid servant didn't do so, and he snapped some knife and what else, with the hope that such a small theft could hardly be discovered. In an instant, the figures all starting up with loud clamor, the boy let fly his arrow at the carbuncle, and in a moment all was in darkness. And if the servant had not, by the advice of his master, made the utmost dispatch in throwing back the knife, they would have both suffered severely. In this manner, their boundless avarice unsatiated, they departed, the lantern directing their ships. And I'm not going to read the last part. We don't have here a moral teaching because this is chronicle, of course, and this follows completely different aims. But it's interesting that Gerbert, for William of Malmesbury, is a very respectful figure, authority, and he says, that he may follow the example of Solomon. So this is not a negative example from the beginning of the story. Now, the main points here again, specifying the place, Campus Martius. Why Campus Martius? Why wanted these people that everything bad, and why all demons were crowded on Campus Martius? There were obvious reasons, of course, for this. And most stories about digging out hidden treasures or liberating some hidden treasures from the surface of Campus Martius are something we can see in the medieval Mirabilia. Then we have a hero which is necromancer. This disappears in the later versions. He's necromancer, and this is not negatively appreciated. He's accompanied by a servant. Of course, he's not digging. He uses magic arts. There are gold people, a boy, and not an adult man, not the traditional image of the deaf with arrows. We have taboo on touching. We have theft and animated figures, not just stone figures, which don't react. We have boundless avarice again, but happy ends. Yeah, this is the surprise. We have a happy end in this story, and there is no moral teaching. And the question is how this story became that story. Of course, for the purpose of a sermon, the churchmen needed a much more simplified story with a clear moral instruction in the end. They didn't need these details. And first of all, they didn't need a necromancer who survived in the end of his bad deeds. The question is how, where comes all this, where it's not in the ancient account of descents, and not in the early medieval as well. So it's logic in this case to take a look at the other possible direction. Of course, I mean the folklore tradition which existed together with the myth in the ancient times. Here, one must use the essential tool for all folklorists, the Arne Thompson Author Index, a tool which includes basic plots which we can find in European, Near Eastern storytellers across the century. Practically, this is the Proto-Indo-European stratum of magic tales. So if one takes a look at this corpus or at Ariadne's thread of William Hansen, or at the authoritative history of the Greco-Roman fable of Adradus, so one can see that there are some other similar motifs. First of all, as actually or this poet from the 19th century knew, we have obvious parallel with the only ancient tale we have. You know, the only ancient tale, not mythos, but tale we have from ancient times. This is the so-called novel. It's not novel about Amor and Psyche, which is a part of the Roman of Apuleius, the Golden Ass. So this is a fable. We have here parallels to the ancient tale of Amor and Psyche, many layered worlds, enchanted palace, invisible servants, and so on, all these magnificent conditions. Then we have in Amor and Psyche again taboos on seeing and not on questioning. We have these malevolent instigators, the sisters of Psyche, who instigate Psyche to break the taboo. A broken promise, a punishment. We have the curiosity motive, which is very important because we are speaking all the time about the intellectual concupiscentia, to use this Augustinian term. And we have, of course, illicit knowledge. And in the end, of course, this beautiful, detailed guide through the underworld, which is integrated in the story with all we know from props morphology of the fairy tale. The helpers, the fair helpers, and the whole system of taboos or instructions, and so on. Secondly, we can, beyond this tale of Amor and Psyche, we have tales about other worlds, which we can extract from manuscripts in the European libraries, which contained another collections of exempla. And in these cases, the underworld has no connection with the world of the dead. It is represented as a sort of separate and parallel world lying below the ordinary world of man. Here, very shortly, most versions have, of course, Eastern origin. they run as follows. So we know, as Balkan people here, we have all in our folklore the same stories, the same tales, yeah? For example, fruit, apple tree, three brothers, three sons of the king who try to catch the thief. The youngest son follows the traces to a well or pit or some other hole leading to the underworld. Then he can, by mounting the black sheep, be carried away to a world below. He saves people from a monster and so on, and then finally is carried up by eagles again into the upper world. These are separate motifs which are specific only for the tale. Or some other story, just to cite this one, the hero of another tale, loaded with a treasure from some mysterious palace, returned to his wife and said that he was coming not from Hades, not from the realm of the dead, but from other place, and that the men there are alive down below, but he doesn't know how to get there. Then, what else? We have Easter motifs. This obviously, yeah. The Easter motif of all these hidden treasures, gold and precious stones below the earth. And curiously, this motif was at some point attached to the names of different Christian emperors. The same motif in a similar pattern is a story which can be used as a positive exemplum. So what does it speak about? That different undercurrents in the popular culture, originating maybe from the apocryphal gospels as Nicodemus' gospel, from the folklore, from the popular beliefs, can be followed in the next centuries. Emperors who defended the pagan rites were swallowed in such stories by the underworld. For example, a very funny story of Marcus Aurelius, who jumped together with his horse. Why together with his horse? Everybody who was going to the capital knows this famous statue. Together with his horse into a hole in Campus Martius. And so this is another story. And of course, Christ saved the others from the hell, filling up this hole. Another curious story, I'm just citing this book of Clapper, who was investigating some exemplar manuscripts from the Middle Ages. Deliberium Imperator Quitesaurum invenit, very typical story. I'm reading just, I have here the Latin text, I'm reading just the English one. Liberius, while passing through a certain palace, saw in the pavement a marble slab in which was sculptured a cross. He had it taken up, saying that the symbol, which should be on men's breasts and brows, ought not to be trodden under feet. Another slab with a cross was underneath, and a third, which, when removed, disclosed a great treasure. Another story in Scala Coeli. The same thing, just the heroes here are referred Gregorius. This is Gregory of Tours, who firstly recorded this story. And he says that Justinius Imperator, of course, all these names are fictional, mostly, yeah. Justinius, this is here Justin II. So mostly these emperors are Byzantine emperors, and mostly from the 6th century. This is an interesting detail. And it only asserts the way how these motifs went from east to the west. We have the same story about Justin here, who found 3 crosses, and they showed the way to hidden treasures. What kind of treasures? It's obviously. We have this story in Paulus Diaconus, as you see in the first generation of the Carolingian Renaissance, but this time the story is connected with the name of another Byzantine emperor. And finally, another important detail which could explain the new things in this story in Gesta Romanorum, beginning with the 11th century and with the Iberian Peninsula as a contact point of the Islamic Caliphate and the Latin West. Huge influx of ideas, texts from the Islamic, Arabic-speaking world permeated West Europe. There was a shift in the learned attitude towards magic as a consequence of that during the 12th century. Some magical practices which drew on natural forces or the virtues of stars and planets were already approved. And on the other side, fears of the new knowledge aroused. And this explains the story about Gerbert, which appears in the chronicle of William. So this is the time exactly when the stereotype figure of the necromancer was invented. The same century, the 12th century, witnessed the rise of the notion of purgatoria. This is well known as well that the Middle Ages, the Christianity didn't have in the beginning this sophisticated topography of the underworld as the ancient times. Even the concept of purgatory, so a different word for this with this specific meaning, is attested for the first time only in the 13th century. And in the 12th century, about which speaking, then we have for the first time this idea that there are purgatory places separate from the hell, not the same as the hell. And there was belief that purgation might happen on these places, which physically existed. I mean, for example, in close vicinity to Mount Etna on Sicily, in caves deep beneath the surface. And the most famous account of such kind of descent, this is the St. Patrick's purgatory, of course. There are two descriptions of this St. Patrick purgatory by Gerald of Wales and by some Cistercian monk who wrote the Vision of Owen. So St. Patrick prayed that God helps him to convert the Irish people by showing them some substantial proof. See, again, we have this motive here to bring something back to prove the reality of what is seen there. Christ showed St. Patrick a cave or a pit or a well. We don't know because it's closed already for centuries. This is on Station Island, and this was the most famous entrance to the purgatory. So some pictures, you can see it, how it looks, Lake of Pergusa in Sicily and Station Island. And I'm going to the end, yeah. The 12th century is a very important step, as I hope I could show. What we have as a further development of this descent motif in the modern times. A very short survey here, you can see the most important steps. Athanasius Kircher with Mundus Subterraneus, 17th century. There are no miraculous explanation. Then we have the respectful Sir Edmund Halley, who we always connect with, the comet. He says that the Earth is hollow. There might be life down there. Then we have something which was mentioned during the lectures in the year, yeah? This treatise of Ludwig Holberg, Climi iter Subterraneum, the journey of Niels Klim in the underworld. He lived several years on a smaller globe within the Earth. Then we have Leclerc in the 18th century who asserted that the Earth is actually older than it was supposed up to this time. And I'll finish with Jules Verne and his famous voyage to the center of the Earth. What comes after that is, as I said, a huge bulk. If you check it, you can see this is really amazingly much what has been written, especially in the 19th century, but in the beginning of the 20th century as well, about images of the descent into the underworld, or possible creatures or inhabitants of this world. And this it coexisted with the developing scholarly discourse about the interior of the world. No problems. Yeah. These things, as we are speaking the whole time, can coexist in our contemporary times as well. So to finish with the words of the translator of Gesta Romanorum, in the preface he said to his listeners, to his readers, when you read these tales, you must retrace your steps to the age in which they were written. A giant or a magician was as probable to the people of the Middle Ages as electricity to us. I pray you bear this in mind whilst you judge of these tales. So if you put ourselves on the place of Swan and his readers in this time, we can say that many contemporary accounts of underworld journey can sound today like a parable of the aims and price of scholarly inquiry. The aims are the same: to liberate treasures from the caves of the earth, to discover, to manipulate, to put to work the nature and the world, to escape hidden dangers, and the hypothetic inhabitants of the underworld. And the moral content, it's present today. I could say in the science fiction, in the movies, in the games even, and this is the lesson of the danger of too much pride and arrogance in our relation to nature and to the work of God. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so actually I want to relate what you were talking about to what Steve was talking about yesterday. So it seems to me one distinction that became very clear as you were sort of narrating all these different myths is a distinction that's very obvious in science fiction as well, and then in all these myths over the thousands of years, and which might be crucial for sort of understanding how the imagination in modern science has developed, and to what extent actually Christianity was kind of like a cutoff line. So one kind of myths is, so typical representative of that myth would be Atlantis, right? Something that existed in the past, or people think, and that can be found somewhere under the earth or in, deep in the ocean, and it sort of comes in and out of science, because scientists are actually seriously looking for Atlantis. There are serious arguments. Science fiction is, but that's sort of a space which is physically somewhere. So it's below and you can find it, and But then there is this other sort of a strand in science fiction, for example, of kind of parallel worlds, where people are collectively, small groups of people are inhabiting the same world physically, but really they are seeing a different world. They can get around in this world, but really they live in a different world at the same time. I mean, now with virtual reality, we can even, that's precisely the idea of virtual reality. You put your goggles and you can go around and see all kinds of things and not stumble, at this world, but it's kind of parallel. The most recent science fiction or fiction novel of that sort is Piranesi by I can't remember her name, where, yes, so a group of people who are, you don't know if they're hallucinating or they're initiating something, but you kind of understand. This second strand is really important for modern science, right? Way more than the Atlantis, kind of a naturalistic. So I'm wondering whether that second one became sort of a much more important with Christianity, whether chronologically there is a kind of a cut-off line in a sense.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. It's really, if somebody expands this traditional classification of the ancient kinds of descent, we'll have now maybe 12 or 15 kinds of different descents, because we can see, you say, a multiplying of these kinds of story, different patterns. And even it's not just about parallel worlds, but about some other dimensions, which is the case with the very much underestimated novel of Holberg about the underworld journey of Niels Klim. There is another time, not just another place, but another time and another dimension. There is really much to investigate about this topic, and it is investigated. I noticed that only in the last 2 decades there appeared some works, including, I believe, Hollow Earth, who are exactly investigating the story of this motive, of this idea about the interior world, about the Hollow Earth. But I didn't know, I didn't happen to come upon some texts which investigating this from the beginning, from the transitions from antiquity to medieval times. For me, the crucial points, but maybe I'm not right, there is much lot to investigate. The crucial points are these different stages of secularization of the idea, as I named them in the resume. The first step in this secularization happened obviously in the transition from primary to secondary form of the myth, so to the literary form of the myth. Then we have this profanization of the story of the idea already in the 2nd century in the story of Amor and Psyche, because this is already, not a very sacred story. We have some everyday details there, some comic details, and so on. This is another step in the secularization. Then the next, and for me, the most obscure phase in the development, in the evolution of this idea is when exactly these Eastern motifs were attached to the names of different Christian and mostly Byzantine emperors. There is a lot to research on this idea. And then the 12th century, the 12th century we all know is important in every possible aspect. It's not surprising that this is another step in the secularization of this motif as well. And about the contemporary times, so you're asking me, I think here, interestingly enough, the 17th century didn't produce something important in this direction. In 19, but the 19th century, maybe every second book, every second text about this topic comes from the 19th century, really. I'm not in the condition just to follow all the bulk of not just books, novels, poems, but some other productions which illustrate this idea. Why is there such increased interest again in the 19th century to this topic? It's difficult for me.
It's the birth of archaeology as well.
Yeah, maybe, this can be it.
Actually, Sloba set me up very well. This is a kind of, I'm going to continue on this line that he was beginning. And I want to talk about, again, sort of contrasting the past and sort of past orientation toward the underworld and a kind of future orientation. So go back to Atlantis. One of the things about Atlantis was that, and this is in a way to hook it up with the sort of broadly Christian sort of story, right? That Atlantis was submerged under a flood, right? And so Francis Bacon, right, his posthumous work, The New Atlantis, right, in a way, he portrays this as somehow a rediscovery, right? There are these voyagers, you know, during the Age of Exploration who rediscovered the New Atlantis. And there's an ambiguity about whether this is the original Atlantis that somehow was there before the fall, right? One of the many falls that biblically are undergone, or whether this is a kind of a new place that's created itself. And because it's a posthumous work, this kind of utopia, which is where he actually most develops his idea of Solomon's house and the whole scientific city and all of that was so much part of his thinking, it actually appears in that work. But there's a kind of ambiguity about whether this is a rediscovery of something before the fall, or whether this is some place that people didn't know about before and they just discover it now. So that's one thing about Atlantis. Now, in terms of this business of the parallel worlds that Slobo was going on about how this is so much part of contemporary science fiction and the sort of video game world, right? I immediately thought about that because the place I would begin this story would be the time machine, right? H.G. Wells is the time machine right at the very end of the 19th century, where in a sense what you have, right, the time machine, the guy is going forward in time, and the thing is, part of the evolution, right, of the human species is that you end up having this kind of dual world, right, where there are these people who live on top and then the people who live in the bottom, right, and it's kind of, again, a bit ambiguous about how exactly they got to be like that, but there is this tension, and it's kind of the way Wells writes about it, it's a kind of, it's very much a kind of class struggle kind of thing, right? Because the people who live on top, who seem superficially very nice and so forth, are kind of stupid, right? But it's the people below them, the Morlocks, right? That those are the guys who in a way kind of matter, and they live underground, right? They live in the underworld, and they're the one who steal the time machine, and pretty much the whole action is around dealing with those guys, even though they're officially the underclass, right, of the underworld. And if you think about, Metropolis, the film Metropolis, right, Fritz Lang,
Yeah,
right,
okay, here
right,
have
right.
the
This kind
tendency
of
yeah,
imagery
yeah,
then
yeah,
carries through, right, in the 20th century.
But you know, it's not completely contemporary. It's not so new, of course, as always, because we have some ancient or, yeah, it was exploited as a medieval example again. This is the motif of the 7 sleepers, or more than 7 sleepers. Here we have again a cross point between space and time. Normally, the 7th sleeper slept in some cave, in some such space. It's not explicitly called some underworld space, but one understands. And they awake in some other time, in some other epoch, yeah? And then about Francis Bacon, of course, he was mentioned many times, and maybe tomorrow he will be mentioned many times. It's a very controversial thing that we have, of course, it was said many times, we have this new methodology and the figure of Bacon as empiricists, and the New Atlantis, and in the same time, he is, I should remind, he's the author of De Sapientia Veterum, about the wisdom of the ancient. This is completely trivial exegesis, completely in the style of the ancient exegesis method as ephemeristic, historical, or physical explanation, physical exegesis. We have the history of, we have a little bit of underworld in the Sapientia Veterum as well, but what does Bacon there? Nothing revolutionary new as explanation. He just tells the story about the abduction of Proserpina and gives this allegorical, physical interpretation. So I think that about figures in the 17th century, this is very often the case, that the old is still there. So he writes this kind of treatise, but he writes the Sapientia Veterum as well.